Soon as I physically can. I've got a tour waiting for me. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that everything works out.
Ozzy Osbourne, founding father of British heavy metal, the frontman for Black Sabbath, and a reality TV luminary, has died after a years-long struggle with Parkinson's disease.
Ozzy Osbourne's final confession and regrets he took to the grave. What if the loudest voice in rock carried a secret so haunting it silenced him in the end? Ozzy Osbourne, once celebrated as the Prince of Darkness and a heavy metal icon,
Ozzy wrote the heavy metal playbook. He was known as the Prince of Darkness.
Spent his final years revealing a different side of himself, one marked by deep emotional pain that even fame couldn't erase. Why did a legend still carry invisible scars? And what did he whisper to Sharon, the one woman who stood by him through everything? Stay with us, because Ozzy's last confession revealed heartbreak and a regret deeper than anyone ever imagined. A surgery meant to heal, but it broke him instead. Ozzy believed the surgery would be a turning point, a chance to feel whole again, even if just for a while. But instead of healing, the procedure marked the beginning of a painful decline he never saw coming. After the spinal operation in 2019, his health took a sharp turn. Recovery didn't happen. Complications crept in. His nerves began shutting down, and Parkinson's.
The cardiac arrest occurred out of the hospital and lists coronary artery disease and Parkinson's disease as contributing factors.
Already shadowing him since his 2003 diagnosis and publicly revealed in 2020, suddenly accelerated, robbing him of what little control he still had. Simple things became unbearable. He couldn't stand without help. Sitting brought sharp pain. Even blinking or turning in bed became a struggle against a body that no longer obeyed. Every day was filled with silent suffering, both physical and emotional. The hardest part wasn't just the pain, it was the disappointment. He had trusted this step might lead him back to something close to normal life. Instead, it pushed him further into darkness. It wasn't only the disease or failed surgery that broke him. It was the realization that the choice he believed might save him had, in truth, hastened his fall. Not because he was weak, but because no one had told him that sometimes doing nothing might have been the kinder option. That peace doesn't always come from fighting. It can come from learning how to let go. For a man once seen as unbreakable, this was a rare and humbling shift. The greatest wound wasn't just the loss of mobility, it was the fading of music, the very core of his identity. Ozzy had long hoped that a risky surgery might give him a second chance, not just to move again, but to sing. Instead, the result was silence. Once the embodiment of untamed energy and raw sound, Ozzy now faced a reality where his voice, his legacy, was barely more than a whisper. The arenas were quiet. The spotlight dimmed. What defined him for decades was no longer his to command. He hadn't just lost physical strength. He lost purpose. What was intended as a final lifeline became the beginning of a deeper absence. Gone was the wild, thrashing stage presence. In its place sat a man dependent on others, watching his body betray him piece by piece. Yet, through the limitations, something within him still reached out, quietly but persistently. He found fragments of expression in scribbled lyrics, unfinished lines that hinted at songs never sung, notes scattered like broken thoughts, clinging to a world that felt just out of reach. And through it all, Sharon remained. While others might have pulled away, she stayed, anchoring what remained of his world. It wasn't about grand declarations, it was about showing up, every single day with patience and loyalty that refused to fade. Ozzy had faced storms before, addiction, breakdowns, controversies, but none of those prepared him for this. The weight of choosing a path that didn't heal, but instead took more than it gave. The surgery hadn't just failed him, it had stolen something final, his voice, his way of saying goodbye. This wasn't a dramatic rock star fall. It was slower, haunting, the quiet unraveling of someone who gave everything on stage, and in the end, was left with only memories, regrets, and the unwavering presence of the one person who never left. The silence that followed, This was the first of his 7 deep regrets. Not just a physical loss, but a spiritual one. A sorrow that reached far beyond broken bones or strained vocal cord. It was personal, and it cut far deeper. Ozzy's second deepest regret wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about Sharon. She had stood by him through addiction, arrests, public meltdowns, and the brutal roller coaster of fame. Time and again she patched together the wreckage of his life and career. Yet despite all she gave, Ozzy faltered. In 2016, the illusion of one of rock's most unbreakable bonds was shattered when news of his infidelity went public. For Sharon, it wasn't just betrayal, it was the deepest crack in a marriage that had survived decades of storms. But she didn't explode publicly or retaliate. She wept quietly, and then, she stayed. That choice, rooted in resilience rather than weakness, became one of the greatest burdens Ozzy would carry. The tabloids chased headlines, but for Ozzy, the scandal was a reminder of how deeply he had hurt the only person who had never turned her back on him. He knew Sharon had saved his life, emotionally, physically, and professionally, and in return, he had broken her heart.
Those same issues broke up Osbourne's first marriage and followed him for decades.
That guilt lingered longer than the pain in his spine or the tremors in his hands. It lived quietly in him, resurfacing during moments of silence, of reflection, of shame. By 2025, as his health declined rapidly, what haunted him most wasn't the surgeries or immobility, it was her unwavering forgiveness. It pierced him deeper than any punishment. Sharon's grace, her decision to stay, became a quiet echo that followed him into his final days. He stopped chasing applause, he turned down tours, stayed home more, and really tried, to listen. It was the only way he knew to make amends. One year, instead of a birthday gift, he left a simple note under her pillow, a few lines that said she had never left his heart, even when he'd failed her the most. To the world, they were rock royalty. But behind the spotlight were bruises, silence, and choices not made for cameras. Sharon's quiet strength didn't just hold their family together, it held Ozzy together, and he never forgot it. In his final days, when his voice was fading and movement painful, he often held her hand, not to explain the past, but to let her feel what he struggled to say. A quiet thank you, a soft apology, a final I love you. Some regrets don't shout, they linger like a constant whisper. For Ozzy Osbourne, it wasn't his health or legacy that haunted him most. It was the fact that despite being one of rock's most iconic voices, he never learned to play an instrument. Not the guitar, not the piano, not even enough harmonica to call his own. It wasn't for lack of desire. He felt unworthy, like a visitor in a world where others spoke in chords and keys. That quiet inadequacy followed him from rehearsal rooms to sold-out arenas. He could sing pain, but he couldn't shape it musically. The distance between his voice and the instruments around him grew into a quiet sorrow, a missing piece that lingered long after the lights dimmed. In his later years, long after the final tours, he admitted he always wanted to sit at a piano and pour his soul into the keys, but he never did. It wasn't just about talent, it was about connection to others, and more painfully, to himself. Even in victory, he often felt unheard. That ache deepened during the darkest chapter of his band's history, the making of Never Say Die, 1978. What was supposed to be a comeback became a collapse. Personal struggles, miscommunication, and emotional fatigue spilled into the music. Critics were harsh. Fans were confused. The band felt hollow. Ozzy didn't just see it as a weak album. He saw it as the symbolic end of something sacred. Though his solo career later revived his image, the shadow of that record never left. He once called it a grave marker, not of his career, but of a version of himself lost in the noise. Decades later, when asked why he never performed those songs live, he quietly replied, "Not all songs are alive. Some were never meant to be heard again." In his later years, Ozzy Osbourne's regrets were not loud or theatrical. They lived quietly in the spaces between memories. Some were private and buried, others impossible to ignore. But all of them came from a shared truth. He wished he'd had more time, more clarity, or just a little more peace. Behind the fame, chaos and history-making records. There was a man still hoping to be understood. And in that honesty, the myth began to crack, revealing the human underneath. One regret stretched back to his solo success in the 1980s. One album in particular, commercially celebrated and wildly successful, left him feeling hollow. He didn't hate the music, but he didn't feel like himself while making it. The sound was too polished, the image too marketable. He was exhausted, creatively disconnected, and lost in a version of himself that didn't feel real. It wasn't failure, but it was a compromise, and one that weighed heavily. Earlier still, the collapse of Never Say Die in 1978 marked another point of sorrow. It was meant to revive Black Sabbath's spark, but instead it exposed the fractures within. Addiction, miscommunication, and burnout turned the sessions into struggle. Critics slammed it. Fans sensed the energy shift. Ozzy later called it a grave marker, not for the band, but for a piece of himself that couldn't be recovered. Even moments that should have been triumphs held pain. The final Black Sabbath concert in Birmingham 2017 was meant to be a full-circle farewell. Yet it was incomplete. Bill Ward, the band's original drummer, wasn't there, left out due to legal and personal rifts. The absence wasn't just symbolic, it left a hole in the performance Ozzy couldn't ignore. The stage was full, but it didn't feel whole. Perhaps his most complicated regret wasn't even musical, it was personal. When the Osbournes hit reality TV in the early 2000s, it redefined his image. He became a pop culture icon, not just a rock legend. The world saw the wild, chaotic, relatable energy of their household, but it came at a cost. The cameras never left. His children, still trying to grow up, became public property. Sharon, his rock, became a media personality overnight. And Ozzy himself, battling addiction, aging, and chronic illness, was exposed during his most vulnerable moments. He later admitted some footage should never have aired. Some moments, once private, became punchlines. Fame had returned, but peace had vanished. Even when the lights faded, the consequences remained. Kelly and Jack carried the weight of fame before they were ready. Sharon faced judgment, both cruel and kind. And Ozzy, no stranger to pain, had opened the door to a different kind of wound. One that touched his family. Still, the truth is, he didn't shy away from it. He acknowledged the cost. He didn't try to mask the damage or rewrite history. He carried it, openly, honestly. Through all of it, the scandal, the records, the regrets, Sharon was there. She didn't walk away. She stood firm in moments that would have broken most. She wasn't just his wife. She was the keeper of his truth, the person who saw the real Ozzy beneath the myth and stayed. Even when betrayal nearly ended their marriage.
News broke that she and husband Ozzy Osbourne have split over Ozzy's alleged affair with his hairstylist.
She chose grace over fury. When his health declined, she gave him strength without needing to be thanked. She didn't perform her love, she lived it. Quietly, steadily. Her care wasn't loud. It lived in gestures, the way she adjusted his pillow, the way she answered questions for him when his voice failed, the way she made sure his legacy was shaped by humanity, not headlines. She never erased his past. She simply held it gently and refused to let it define him. She believed in him when he didn't. In their future, when the doctors had lost hope, she didn't carry him physically. She carried everything else. His pain, his regrets, his memory. Never asking for applause, never needing it. And when Ozzy had nothing left to give, not music, not strength, not even words, she gave him presence, a soft hand, a steady voice, the kind of love that doesn't need to be declared, because it's already understood. Some love stories are loud, others are patient. Sharon's was both. She didn't just love Ozzy Osbourne, she protected the man who created him. When the crowds were gone and the applause faded, it was her voice that remained. And in his final moments, when even memory began to slip, she made sure he didn't leave with pain. He left with peace. Her love never left. No matter how broken someone becomes, if even one person truly stays by their side, they're never completely gone. That truth defined the final chapter of Ozzy's journey. Just days after publicly revealing the toll of a life lived on the edge, he returned to the place where it all began. On July 5, 2025, in Birmingham, he took the stage for the last time. There were no flames, no spectacle, just dim lighting, a quiet crowd, and a fragile figure with a cane. It wasn't a concert, it was a closing circle. The city that gave birth to heavy metal stood still as its most legendary voice whispered goodbye. Ozzy didn't need to shout. His presence alone brought thousands to tears. He spoke little, but every note he sang carried the weight of decades, no longer masked by theatrics, but delivered with raw honesty. Age and illness had stripped him of power, but gifted him something deeper: truth, reflection, and closure. Behind that performance lay unimaginable struggle. Rehearsals were grueling. He often had to sit during sound checks, struggling to breathe or walk. Parkinson's disease, spinal surgery complications, and nerve damage.
Ozzy Osbourne and his family are opening up about his ongoing health battle, including the revelation that he's been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, it's a nervous system disorder.
Had taken their toll. Yet, he showed up, not for sympathy, but to give something back. To his fans, to music, and to the wild years that had shaped him. He didn't stick to just the hits. He sang tracks tied to his darkest chapters, songs born from addiction, heartbreak, and personal loss. But this time, they didn't sound like cries for help. Tracks like Changes, No More Tears, and Paranoid became soft farewells, messages from a man stepping away, not with fear but with grace. Sharon stood quietly behind the curtain. No tears, just her hands pressed to her heart, holding on. Nearby, Tony Ammon and Geezer Butler watched silently. This wasn't about fame anymore. It was about love, memory, and parting ways. Yet something was missing. Bill Ward, the original drummer, wasn't there. Ozzy looked toward the empty drum set more than once. He never spoke of it, but the absence was loud. They had begun this journey together, and not finishing it as a complete band left a silent wound. Still, Ozzy kept going. Some goodbyes must be made, even when incomplete. Then came the final moment. No encores, no drawn-out farewell, just one quiet sentence, and darkness. As the lights dimmed, the screens lit up with a message that stunned the audience. Every dollar from the performance, $190 million, would go to Parkinson's research, Birmingham Children's Hospital, and Acorns Children's Hospice. He couldn't rewrite the past, not the pain, the broken years, or regrets, but he could leave something behind. Something good. As thousands sang with him one last time, Ozzy wasn't just ending a career. He was healing, asking for forgiveness, and offering gratitude. This wasn't a rock show. It was a farewell wrapped in love. A man once defined by chaos, now remembered for courage, flawed, fearless, and finally at peace. A heavy farewell. 17 days after his final performance, Ozzy Osbourne passed away peacefully at home in Buckinghamshire on the morning of July.
Our beloved Ozzy Osbourne has passed away this morning. He was with his family and surrounded by love.
There were no headlines or cameras, just soft light and Sharon by his side, holding his hand. After decades of battling addiction, illness, and near-death experiences, he slipped away quietly, finally free of pain. When the news broke, the world paused. Radio stations aired tributes. Fans in Birmingham lit candles. Skyscrapers in New York displayed his image. In São Paulo and Tokyo, crowds sang and lit bat-shaped candles, symbols forever tied to his name. Just over 2 weeks before, on July 5, Ozzy had returned to Birmingham for a final show. He walked on stage with a cane, breathing labored from Parkinson's disease, nerve damage, and recent spinal surgery. But he came to finish something, not for spectacle, but closure. Songs like Changes, No More Tears, and Paranoid became quiet farewells. At the end of the concert, one message lit up. $190 million from the event would be donated to Parkinson's research, Birmingham Children's Hospital, and Acorns Children's Hospice. That final act was his redemption. A promise kept to Sharon, to his fans, and to himself. After his death, tributes poured in from around the world, not just from celebrities but from nurses, veterans, and everyday fans who found strength in his voice. To many, Ozzy represented more than rock and roll. He was proof that broken lives can still create meaning. Sharon later spoke from the room where he passed, holding the ring he gave her decades ago. She said he faced death with peace, the same way he faced life without flinching. His funeral was private. No press, just close friends, family, and a playlist he curated himself. The tracks weren't just hits, but deeply personal songs written during his darkest moments. Sharon called them windows into his soul. Global mourning continued. Artists from all genres honored him, proving his influence had long transcended metal. And when the tributes ended, one truth remained. There will never be another Ozzy. He didn't just leave the stage, he closed a chapter of music history. But legends don't fade. They echo in every heavy chord, in every outsider looking for a voice. Ozzy will still be there. He didn't disappear into darkness. He left in stillness, quiet and eternal. Ozzy Osbourne's death couldn't be neatly explained by a medical report. Yes, Parkinson's had ravaged his body, nerves misfiring, pain etched into every movement, but that wasn't what truly brought him to the end. What weighed him down most was emotional. Years of regret, unspoken apologies, and memories that never dulled. The broken promises, the nights his family suffered during his worst spirals, the words he couldn't take back, those became the heavier burden. In the final chapter, it wasn't the disease that claimed him, but the silence. A man who had weathered chaos and fed off the noise of thousands was finally overcome by stillness. The applause faded, but the echoes of his past remained deafening. Some wounds never heal, not the kind etched into flesh, but the ones that settle into the soul. Ozzy carried those invisible scars, and over time they wore him down more than any diagnosis ever could. He didn't fear death. He feared leaving before making things right. And in the end, it was that quiet fear, not illness, that led him home. Before you go, take a moment to remember, we all carry regrets, words left unspoken, choices we wish we could change. If Ozzy's journey touched something inside you, let it remind you, healing doesn't always come from fixing the past, but from knowing we're not carrying it alone. Tonight, we didn't just witness a story, we carried a piece of it. Together. Thanks for watching.